Welcome back, everyone. We're diving into a fascinating and controversial figure today, Erich von Manstein.
One of Germany's top generals in World War II.
Exactly. And we're going to be exploring his perspective
By his
through,
own word.
right, excerpts from his memoir, Lost Victories,
A really valuable look into his thinking on strategy
leadership.
and just the challenges of fighting a war, especially under Hitler.
So right off the bat, we see this tension between Manstein, this brilliant military mind.
And the realities of, well, Nazi Germany.
Yeah. And one thing that struck me was how skeptical Manstein was of Hitler's intentions.
Even before the war really kicked off.
Before Poland, you mean?
Yeah. In 1939, when, all signs were pointing to conflict, a lot of officers were puzzled by
By what?
the construction of the Ostwall. Is this fortification line in eastern Germany. Seemed odd.
Why build defenses if you're planning to attack, right?
Exactly. Like, why prepare to defend if you're the one going on the offensive?
And at this point, Germany had just rearmed. They weren't exactly the dominant force in Europe yet.
No, they weren't. So taking on Poland was already a risk, let alone potentially starting a wider war.
So did Manstein speak up? I mean, if others were questioning things.
He mentions his skepticism in Lost Victories, but doesn't talk about outright opposing anything.
Interesting. Almost like he was, I don't know, underestimating Hitler's ambitions at that point.
It's possible, but he's also pretty critical of the Polish side,
How so?
their deployment. They ignored natural defenses, like rivers, put their armies right on the border.
Made them vulnerable to the Blitzkrieg.
Exactly. And this highlights something key about Manstein's thinking. He was all about exploiting weaknesses, using speed and maneuver.
Which leads us to France, 1940, where Manstein really clashes with the German High Command, the OKH.
Yeah, he thought their plan was way too cautious. Limited objectives. He wanted to just knock France out completely.
And that's where his Zickelschnitt plan comes in.
The big one, this bold strike through the Ardennes forest.
Completely unexpected.
So unexpected, the High Command rejected it initially
But then Hitler comes in.
and seemingly adopts it. Though to be fair, historians still debate how much of it was really Manstein's idea.
A little bit of historical mystery there. But regardless, it worked. France falls in weeks.
And then, of course, we have the halt order at Dunkirk.
Oh, man. Dunkirk. Hundreds of thousands of Allied soldiers escape. What does Manstein say about this?
Well, gives a few possibilities. One is that Hitler wanted to conserve German armor for later.
Okay, makes sense in a way.
Another is that Goering, the head of the Luftwaffe, thought his air force could handle the evacuation.
Really? Just bomb them on the beaches.
Yeah. And then there's this idea that maybe Hitler was actually suspicious of the army's success.
You mean like worried about a powerful general staff getting too independent?
Something like that. So it's not just military strategy, it's politics too.
And this really highlights that difference between Manstein and Hitler.
Totally. Manstein wanted to capitalize on chaos, keep the enemy guessing. Hitler wanted control, even if it meant missing opportunities.
Like with the potential invasion of Britain.
Operation Celian. Manstein felt they had a chance, but Hitler hesitated.
And ended up fighting a war on two fronts, which didn't go so well for Germany in World War I.
Right. And that hesitation, that prioritizing his own gut feelings over military advice, it's going to have serious consequences as we move to the Eastern Front.
Okay, so next time we're off to Russia. And that's where things get really intense.
So now we've got Manstein on the Eastern Front, leading the 56th Panzer Corps during Operation Barbarossa.
The invasion of the Soviet Union. Talk about a whole new level of challenge.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the vast distances alone, the weather, and the Red Army, so resilient.
Yeah, unlike anything he faced before. And then, of course, there's the Commissar Order.
Right, right. This order to execute captured Soviet political officers, the commissars.
A truly dark chapter. I mean, it shows the ideological brutality of the Nazi regime.
And Manstein doesn't sugarcoat it in his memoir. He's very clear about the unease it caused among the officers.
Even himself. He talks about finding mutilated German soldiers, hinting at reprisals for the executions.
Yeah, it's a chilling reminder of that cycle of violence that war can unleash.
A sobering thought. But amidst all this, we still see Manstein's tactical brilliance, that drive to the Dvina River.
Deep into Soviet territory, a classic example of his skill in mobile warfare.
And then he gets the order to halt.
Just as victory seemed within reach. And this is where the tension with Hitler flares up again.
Manstein was furious. He argued that the pause let the Soviets regroup.
And he lost that crucial momentum.
He wanted to keep pushing, but Hitler had other ideas.
Yeah, and it's interesting to compare this to his reaction at Dunkirk.
Right. At Dunkirk, he was all about caution, conserving strength. Here, it's all about relentless attack.
I think it shows his understanding of the enemy. The Red Army was huge, fighting on their own ground.
He knew a cautious approach wouldn't work.
Had to fight fire with fire.
Match their ferocity. And that takes us to the Crimean campaign, a brutal but brilliant operation.
Culminating in the capture of Sevastopol. A really tough nut to crack.
Remind me, where's Crimea exactly?
Oh, it's that peninsula jutting into the Black Sea, south of Ukraine. Controls access to the Black Sea.
Got it. So strategically important.
Very much so. And the terrain was awful. Mountains, narrow coasts, few roads. Plus, the Soviet defenses were strong.
How did Manstein overcome all that?
Well, he used everything. Firepower, maneuver, even deception. He even used captured Soviet landing craft for an amphibious assault.
Wow, like turning their own weapons against them. That's incredibly audacious.
It worked, though. Capturing Sevastopol was a major victory. But it also highlighted that growing rift between Manstein and Hitler.
Over strategy.
Exactly. Manstein thought they should focus on Moscow, cripple the Soviet command structure.
Go for the head, so to speak.
Right. But Hitler was obsessed with Leningrad. Symbolically important, but less strategically valuable.
Again, letting ego overrule strategy.
And this pattern keeps repeating. Most tragically at Stalingrad. A real turning point.
Stalingrad, just the name conjures up those images of urban warfare suffering on a massive scale.
Manstein describes it also vividly. The overstretched German lines, vulnerable supply routes, the sheer will of the Soviets.
And then the Sixth Army gets trapped in the city.
As winter sets in. A nightmare scenario.
And Manstein is tasked with rescuing them.
An impossible task, made even harder by Hitler.
Refusing to allow a breakout.
Yep. Manstein described those desperate pleas to Hitler, the airlift operation, the growing despair.
Knowing a breakout was possible but being denied, that must have been agonizing.
It raises a big question. Why didn't he resign? He clearly disagreed with Hitler.
So why stay?
He talks about duty to his soldiers, his country, a belief that staying could lessen the damage. But you sense that inner conflict.
Duty versus conscience.
Exactly. And Stalingrad becomes this horrific turning point, a loss that really shook Germany.
And Manstein personally, I imagine.
Absolutely. But he didn't give up. He still had to manage the retreat. And that's what we'll look at next. How he fought a losing war and those final clashes with Hitler over strategy.
So last we left off, the German army was in a really bad spot. Reeling from Stalingrad, facing that long retreat from Russia.
Yeah, talk about a tough situation. Not about winning anymore. It was all about survival.
Holding on to what they could. And that's where Manstein's tactical skills, they really become crucial.
Absolutely. Defensive warfare, making the most of limited resources, getting his troops out of tight spots.
I remember reading about this leapfrogging tactic he used. What was that exactly?
So imagine you got your defenses set up, but the enemy's pushing hard, about to break through.
Right.
Instead of just digging in, you set up another line further back.
I see.
And you pull your troops back, like in stages. Almost like, leapfrogging over each other.
Clever. Trading space for time.
Exactly. Slow them down, keep your own strength up. It takes real coordination, discipline.
Which Manstein?
In spades. He prevented a lot of German units from being surrounded and wiped out.
It must have been, well, terrifying for those soldiers. Constant fighting, retreating, knowing the odds were against them.
The Eastern Front was brutal, no doubt about it. And through all this, he was still clashing with Hitler.
He never really stopped, did you?
No. Manstein kept pushing for a smarter retreat. Shorten the front lines, consolidate forces, give up unimportant territory.
Make a stronger defense.
Exactly. Save lives. But Hitler, well, you know Hitler.
Wouldn't give an inch.
Nope. Holding on to every bit of land, no matter what. Any retreat was weakness, a hit to his ego.
And that stubbornness really hurt Germany in the end.
Oh, for sure. Not adapting to the reality on the ground. It's kind of like watching a tragedy, you know?
You see the hero's downfall because of the leader's flaws.
That's a good way to put it. So what does Manstein say about Hitler after all that?
Yeah, what's his final verdict?
It's interesting. He recognizes Hitler's strength, his charisma, that willpower, how he could inspire people. But he also sees the flaws. Micromanaging, not listening to experts, thinking willpower could overcome anything.
So even someone close to him saw those cracks.
Yeah. It's that mix of admiration and frustration, a really complicated relationship. And it makes you think, how did Manstein balance his own brilliance with serving a dictator?
Big question.
It seems like for Manstein, it came down to duty, loyalty to his country, his soldiers. He thought by staying, he could limit the harm.
But what about the personal cost? Seeing all that horror, fighting his own leader, that had to weigh on him.
Definitely. And lost victories. It's not just military stuff, it's about the moral struggles, the psychological toll of war.
It's a reminder that history is made by people, with their own beliefs, good and bad.
And even the smartest people can get caught up in these huge events, making tough choices with consequences they can't always see.
So in the end, Manstein's story, it's a bit of a tragedy.
I'd say so. Genius wasted by ideology and denial.
A lesson about power, about strategy, and the human cost of war. We hope you found this deep dive into Manstein enlightening.
Yeah, it's a complex story, and there's a lot more out there. Books, articles, documentaries, tons to learn from.
So keep exploring, keep asking those questions. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll be back soon with another fascinating topic. Until then, keep learning and keep those conversations going.